Greetings, gentlemen. This is Ohio Dan. This video is going to be a little bit different in the sense that this is kind of a dedication video to Timothy Bladez. Now, Timothy Bladez was a MGTOW content creator from years ago now. He asked me to make a video at one point about single fatherhood. And at the time, I kind of just rejected the idea of doing it because I've never had kids, and I wasn't sure where to go with that topic without basically talking out of my ass, right? Without saying something that other men within the community wouldn't be a lot more informed in discussing, that wouldn't have a better perspective on. And Timothy Bladez unfortunately passed away toward the end of 2018. His mental health had gone downhill probably for the last year or so of his life, and it was because of the hell that he had been put through by the family courts. He had gotten married, gotten divorced, had 2 children, and had gone through the ringer, where you could tell that he had been through some stuff. He had a few things in common with Youngson. He had served a certain amount of time in the military. I think he was in the Marines, and he had also become a heavy diesel mechanic after that. But he was a cool guy. He was somebody that was always kind of different in terms of how he would make content, but especially the last year or so of his life, you could tell that his mental health wasn't there by that point, right? He wasn't making sense in a lot of his videos, and he did end up committing suicide, and that's how his life ended. And he deserved a better outcome than that. I know that he loved his children very much, and it always bothered me that I never honored his request to make a video, and I never really knew what direction to take this for a long time. But it did occur to me at one point that there is something I have to say about single fatherhood, and it's something that I think is important, and it's based on observing other men that do have children in this community over time, and also just what I see going on when men do choose to delete themselves. They do choose to end it all because they can't effectively fight for their children anymore. So that's what I'm going to make this video about, right? I've never been a father, and I almost certainly never will be, but I can understand the need to fight for what is best for one's children. And while I can't come up with any general advice for how to fight for your kids, that probably can't be better said by somebody else within this community or someone else that has experience going through the family courts, having false accusations made against them about their kids or anything like that. I will say that if it ever gets to a point as a father where you're out of options due to the family court system, and you're no longer permitted to be part of your child or children's lives aside from paying monthly child support, then at that point, it may be necessary to reassess your situation. And what I mean by that is, if you truly are not playing a positive role in your kids' lives, if you truly don't have anything that you can do for your children, there's no visitation, or your children basically hate you because they've been poisoned against you by the mother of your children, and the money that you give for the well-being of your children, the mother is just spending that on whatever she wants. It's not really helping your kids very much. Then at that point, and I want to be precise with how I say this, it's not your family anymore. At that point, you have no role to play. If there's nothing you can do to fight for your kids, then you have to be able to give yourself permission to let go. And you could be in a situation where you have a good relationship with one of your children, but not the other, and the other child, you're not helping them in any way, shape, or form. You're just giving money to the mother, and she's doing whatever she wants with that, basically. If it ever gets to that point, you've got to be able to realize that that's not your kid anymore. I hate to put it like that. This is not going to be a video that gets like universal thumbs up. I'm sure that there'll be men that disagree with this and say that I have the wrong attitude or approach. But from what I've seen within the community, it's when men can no longer effectively fight for their children that they end up ending themselves, that they end up doing something heinous to the mother of their kids or to a judge or random people in general, right? They go out with a bang, so to speak. And that's not what you want to be doing. It makes a lot more sense to just acknowledge what is and not try to fight a battle that you have no way to fight anymore. if you cannot be part of your children's lives. And I get that that's a really difficult thing to approach, but if you are just a child support check father, you are a wage slave, and you have no healthy relationship with your kid, it's not your kid. The state and the woman that you had that kid with have conspired against you to take that away from you. And if it truly reaches that point where there's nothing else that you can do, and I don't just mean, well, my kid's mad at me or doesn't like me, but the mother of my kids is spending money on the children. So at least the money that I'm paying in child support is going to something, right? There's some positive spin to that, even though the situation is 99% negative. If it's 100% negative and you're not playing a positive role in your child's life, it's over. Not for you, but in terms of your relationship with that kid or your children. If you have multiple children in that situation, it's not over in terms of your own life, but you have to be able to move on because there's nothing left that you can do for that situation. Effectively, it's not your kid anymore if it ever gets to that extreme point. And it does fairly often. I know men have talked about this where they've done everything they can to have a relationship with their children, but they're just not permitted to because the woman, through the state apparatus, has basically conspired to remove you from the situation. And that's not your fault. If you're a dad in that situation, it's not your fault that that's the way things are. It's not just because you chose the wrong woman. You may very well regret having children with that woman, but you probably did what you were supposed to do. And maybe you made some mistakes along the way, but it's not your fault that you don't get to be part of your children's lives. It's because of these entities conspiring against you. It's because of the gynocentric feminist nature of our society telling you that you as a man don't deserve to be in your own kids' lives. That's the reality behind the situation. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that. I get the impression that this is the point when many fathers consider self-deletion or acts of desperation. It's not when the fight gets really difficult. It's not when you've lost all of your money trying to remain part of your kids' lives. It's not when essentially you're suffering and you're a wage slave and you're barely getting by. It's when you don't have any battle left to fight. It's when you can't find a way to be there for your kids anymore. That is when men give up. That is when men delete themselves. That is when men completely go off the deep end and do things that are wrong to other people that may not have even been involved in the situation or only tangentially related, right? That is when men lose it. That is when men make poor decisions. And what I'm saying is an alternative to that is to let go of it. Now, I can't give specific advice for how to get out of child support or spousal support and alimony. There are things that you could do, some of which are legal, some of which maybe not. It's up to you to decide your level of risk of what you're going to do to move on with your life. But I would suggest trying to move on with your life, at least in relation to kids, to children that you have that are genetically yours, but are not yours in any other sense, in terms of your ability to participate in those children's lives. Let yourself go in that situation. Don't continue to hate yourself or blame yourself for something that really you didn't have any control over once the woman got pregnant in most cases. I think it's healthier to consider that if you're ever forced out of your children's lives entirely, it's not actually your fault that your children are alienated against you and that you can allow yourself to move on from an impossible situation if it gets to the point where it's impossible. If it gets to a point, again, where there's no battle that you can fight to effectively stay in your children's lives. While I can understand, at the same time, leaving the door open to reestablishing a relationship with the child in the future if once the child's 18 or at least old enough to make their own decisions and they reach out to you, or the mother finally runs out of good grace, right? She finally does something that's so crazy that she herself is going to jail, or she herself has been ostracized from the family. Maybe somehow there's a way for you to step back into their lives. You can consider that, but that is a point in the future. That is a point that may or may not ever happen, and you don't really have control over that either. All you can do is move on and make the best decisions for yourself as someone that tried to be the best father he could in that situation, but essentially was not allowed to. If you are in this situation, there is ultimately a time to walk away if you're only serving as a support check for those who seek to destroy or enslave you. The mother of your kids conspiring with the state to put you in that situation is what's to blame. And again, that's not to say that that justifies anything, that justifies heinous acts or things that you do that you'll regret later. I'm not talking about doing those kinds of things. That should be avoided as well, but so should self-harm, and so should blaming yourself for being in that situation where really you didn't have control over that outcome. It makes sense to continue fighting for your children when there is a positive role to play for your kids. But if that possibility is completely gone and wiped out at a certain point, then other measures may be required to avoid indentured servitude with the state and to avoid giving up on your life entirely because you no longer have a battle that you can fight to remain in your kids' lives. I hope that makes sense. I've seen other men reach this conclusion that have had kids and realized at some point that, okay, my kid is completely poisoned against me. There's really nothing I can do to change that. I can keep paying child support for the woman and keep funding the government, but it's not really helping my children. I'm done. I realize this isn't my kid anymore. I realize that this kid has been taken from me. I've done everything I can. I fought every battle that I could have fought. And at some point, it's just, there's nothing left for me to do. Not only do I not have money, but there's no legal recourse. The legal system has decided against me at every turn. Fine. It's done. And I know it's a lot easier for me to say that in a way that sounds like it's nonchalant because I don't have kids, right? I'm aware of that. I'm cognizant that my not having children greatly affects my take on this. But I have, again, observed men who have had kids taken from them through the family courts, through false accusations by the woman, through the woman just basically using the court system to destroy the guy's life. And the father finally decides, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. Or, again, if you can find a positive role to play in your kids' lives, then what I'm talking about doesn't apply here. But I do think that it's important to not end up wanting to end yourself, to not end up completely giving up on your own life. If you're not allowed to be part of your children's lives because of what the state has done, and the woman has used the state to accomplish this, that's not your fault. That's not something you have to hold on to. All you can do is the best that you can. And if you have to find a way to not be a wage slave by, let's just say, not living in the same country anymore, right? I'm not going to talk about doing anything specifically illegal, but you guys can decide what your level of risk is for that if you're going to consider that kind of option. But it doesn't serve any purpose to continue to do that if it's not actually helping your kids. It doesn't serve any purpose to beat yourself up over something that you really don't have control over. Unfortunately, we live in a society where it is considered the father's fault, no matter what happens, in terms of divorce, in terms of parental upbringing, like the role that you play in your kids' lives. You're not permitted to be there for your kids, but then it's your fault when they're not raised well, that type of thing. And what I'm saying is that that's all a bunch of horse shit. And at some point, if you're not allowed to play a positive role in your kids' lives, it's healthier to let go of that than it is to let go of yourself. It's healthier to move on from that as best you can. And I'm not saying you shut the door completely on a relationship with that child or those children, but you stop being a slave to a system that doesn't actually help your kids. You stop supplying a woman a more comfortable lifestyle for herself while your children are not necessarily doing better without you. Again, I'm not saying that in some idealistic sense that it's a comparison to if you never had a divorce or anything like that. If there's some positive role for you to play, I understand still wanting to do that. But if that's not the case, then I think it's important to be able to let yourself off the hook mentally in that situation and move your life forward in a positive way on that basis as best you can, and to realize it's not your fault that that's the outcome that you've reached. It's not your fault that people conspired against you to lead to that result. It is because of the culture and the legal system that we have that enables women to do this to the father of their children that has led to these outcomes more. And don't end yourself. Don't give up hope for your life entirely. Realize that it's not your fault that you're in that situation, and do your best to let go if you can. Do your best to move on and focus on the positive things that you can still do with your life instead of on children that may be yours genetically, but you can't really have a positive role to play in their lives anymore. If that's actually the case and you're in an impossible situation, it's okay to find some sort of way to move on from that. And so guys, that's my dedication. I don't know whether Timothy Bladez would have agreed with anything that I've said here. He may have hated this video, I don't know. But he was a good man. He deserved a better outcome for himself. I know that he did not give up on his children. I know that his mental health suffered with a lot of what he had been through. I've never really talked about that in any detail at all on my channel, but he is someone that we've lost in this community, even if it was back in 2018, and we're worse off for him not being here. And again, I know that the topic is a little bit beyond just speaking to single fathers in general, but I feel like this was kind of the one thing that I could say, the one message that I had regarding my advice to single dads. And I hope that this is something that single fathers can find useful. Don't be in a situation that's hopeless, where you can't fight any battle for your kids anymore, and so you just give up. Move on if you possibly can from an impossible situation like that. If there is no positive role for you to play in your kids' lives, it's not your fault that that's the situation you're in, but do the best that you can to move forward instead of hating yourself for not being able to be part of your kids' lives the way you wanted to.